Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we are chatting with Lisa. So Lisa, welcome to the show. Lisa wrote the book, Parallel Recovery, a guide for those who love someone with substance use disorder. Ooh, I can't get it out. So Lisa, tell us a little about yourself before we talk about parallel recovery.
Well, thanks for having me on, Melissa. Honored to be present for Women's History Month. I am a family consultant. I work across the U.S. With families impacted by someone that they love who struggles with mental health or substance use disorder. So I support families to be a part of the change process. I call it sharing the burden of change. And I really enter the system of recovery through the family as opposed to the person struggling with the disorder. So it's a little bit of a different entry point, but I believe there's a really great reason for it. There's several great reasons for it. One being the people who are willing to get help or to make things different are usually the family system before the person who's actually impacted. So I, ask the question, why would we not start earlier when we can? And there's a lot of research behind families being guided to love a little bit differently and communicate a little bit differently, and how that can drastically increase the chances of somebody else getting support. So I have my own journey of substance use and mental health with my oldest son. And over the course of that struggle, I discovered that there wasn't a lot of help that felt good. There was either step back and get out of the way because you're a problem, or there was suggestions to kind of be over involved. And neither of those are really effective. So I kind of became who I needed. I really developed a system I call parallel recovery, which is family recovery separate from the person of concern. And I invite families to start the process before, during, or after their person's own engagement in recovery process.
And I love that because it didn't dawn on me until like 3/4 of the way through your book, why it was called parallel recovery. And I was like, because you mentioned it, and I'm like, oh, that's why. I'm like, I don't know why. Because you obviously, when you have someone who has substance abuse, your focus is on trying to get them well. Right. But in turn, you also have to deal with a lot of mental health issues, especially if you're a mom or it's your child that's going through this, and you're like, okay, what did I do wrong? That guilt factor comes in as well. Why wasn't I watchful enough? And everything like that. So take us through your journey through that, because like you said, there wasn't a lot out there for you through this.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I am a pretty typical person. Like I don't have anything major standing out in my life that would have anybody go, oh, you're going to have some problems. And so, I live in a middle-class neighborhood, and my kids were involved in sports, and we did all the things. I was in the PTA. I did, volunteered on my kids' swim teams and all that kind of stuff. We did all the things. I was a teacher for 23 years. So I know about adolescence and development and all that kind of stuff. So when this entered our home, it felt like eyes were on us that we had done something wrong. And we hadn't done anything wrong. Not only had we not done anything wrong, but we really weren't given a hand to get out of it. We were just given a lot of sort of stares, or people would walk away, or, well, you're just going to have to get through it. And I'm like, well, but people die from this. What does getting through it mean? I don't know. I can't even see tomorrow, let alone getting through. And I think that's a really important thing to note, that this isn't about getting through. This isn't about putting a lid and a bow on a problem. Brain disorders are chronic, and it's about learning how to live with challenges with somebody's brain and the behaviors that can come with it, that can be destructive. So definitely a lot of, we better just keep it to ourselves. We need to, not tell anybody, not really ask for help. But I'll be honest, I even asked our pediatrician for help, and, there wasn't much support. There was go to family therapy. Well, what does that mean? Like, nobody knew how to guide families to just show up differently in this situation. The only guidance was wait for the situation to change or try and control the situation so it doesn't get worse. And again, going back to what I said at the beginning, those are not effective solutions.
No.
Those are not effective ways of being in the process. So I went through, I mean, my son struggled for a long time. And over the course of that struggle, there came a moment, I write about it in my book, where our eyes met, and he was living in our home very chaotically. And when he left, I realized that if he were not to return, that I was not going to be okay with what I was leaving with him with, what he saw, what he felt, and what he heard from me. That all three of those sensory things, I was not going to be proud of that. And rather than focusing on he might not return, I focused on how can that look different? And that changed everything. And I went out and I found that there are a lot of modalities and support tools that guide people, but nothing was really put together well. And it just felt poorly put together, and nobody was implementing it. I kind of, as a teacher, sort of created my own process for myself. And, as we got healthier as a family, and I started to talk about things a little bit more, people just came out of the woodworks. You need to talk to my sister. I need to talk to you. You need to talk to my husband because his brother is, and just all, like, in every single household, somebody has been impacted, if not directly, secondarily. And that's what the data shows as well. 1 in 12 people in this country, in the US, are diagnosable for a substance use disorder. That's a lot of people. And I always say that's not just in your community. That's not just on your street. That's on your front steps. That's in your home. So 1 in 12, everyone has a circle of 12 people. Somebody who's dramatically impacted. And so this is really a process of supporting somebody's hard human experience that's expressed as substance use in a way that invites them to do better and keeps you engaged in the relationship.
So give us a scenario about that, because I know a lot of people are like, well, that's just words that she's just throwing out there. Put your money where your mouth is, basically what people are probably going to say when they hear this. So give us a scenario.
Right. So when families, or chosen or not, start to engage differently in the relationship. So stop focusing on the problems, which, by the way, those are problems. It's just de-emphasizing the problems and emphasizing the relationship. For example, I'll just pick something really small. Rather than, let's say, the night before, someone made poor choices and came home again having had too much to drink and ruining the evening. Rather than the next morning talking about how they ruined the evening, which is a true statement. You were impacted by that. Instead of that, get curious with that person and say, hey, last night was really hard for me. I imagine that it was probably really hard for you too. Help me understand what went on before we left the house so that I can understand better why it ended the way it did. So you're asking the person what hurts, as opposed to why are you bad because of your behaviors. It's really the idea of kind of pulling apart the human from their behavioral expression, right? Like the thing that we hate, they're drinking too much. That's important. You need to create boundaries around it. And it's important to state it, that was really impactful. I'm not comfortable going out with you when there's alcohol involved because it gets embarrassing and I feel like I have to save you. That's an okay thing to say. And I encourage it. But the other piece of it is, why does it get there? Substance use is a solution to a problem. What is the problem that we're solutioning? And the other part about substance use or any other maladaptive coping skill, self-harm, suicidality, other things, that anger management, all kinds of things that are not good coping skills, they become a mask for the problem because they're the loudest talker. The problem, the behavior, is a big talker. And we can't see beyond that problem to get, or the behavior to get to the actual problem. But if you heard your loved one say, I'm not a very interesting person if I don't drink, we would have compassion for that. I wouldn't want somebody to feel, I would say, well, I'm sorry that you feel like that, because that's certainly not how I experience you. Is this something we could work on?
I love that. And I love the fact that you're taking, because most of the time when you have someone who has that abuse problem, a substance use problem, you're so busy pointing fingers at and getting so mad at the behavior that you're not trying to figure out what's causing the behavior. And that kind of takes the pressure off of you and the pressure off the person if you don't sit there and say, why did you drink too much last night? Da, 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 and go off on them. Instead of you say, okay, it was a lot for me, because you're telling your emotions. And then, like you said, why did it get this way?
Yeah. What happened? What happened during the day? Or what is it that alcohol allows you to do or doesn't allow you to do? Or what does it solve? If we start talking about it as opposed to a behavior, but as a symptom, it just changes. It invites people into wanting to solution differently. Nobody really wants to suck at their life.
And it brings their defenses down where they may be more open instead of their back up against the wall. Or you have a problem with X, Y, and Z. You know, this is your problem, not mine. Instead, it's like, oh, wait a second, they really do care about me. But they're also,
and when I talk to families, I always say, it's not you have a problem. It's we have a problem. And here's how I'm going to solution it for myself. And then invite them into the process of solutioning with you.
That is.
Yeah. And I'd like to, if you will humor me, throw out a couple numbers, because there is exponential data and research behind this. When families are just sort of guided the clunky way that we were, the success rate of somebody overcoming substance use disorder is 11%. It's not very good. And those aren't numbers that you want to promote, right? But when you start engaging the family early and with a really comprehensive support structure around them to change how they engage in the relationship, within 6 months, those success numbers of abstinence or much reduced use go from 11% to 64%. That's an exponential change. And if you talk about a family continuing for the period of a year, so really getting like, this is a new way of living with us, those numbers go up to 82%. So industry-wide, we've got a problem with drugs and alcohol in this country. And we're not doing a good job helping people. Not because professionals aren't good, but because brains are tricky. And people who get help go back to the system that they got sick in. Not because the system was sick or the system was bad, but because something just wasn't working. So let's just adjust everything. It's so simple.
Yeah, it is so simple, but when you're dealing with emotions and people, sometimes gets kind of tricky as well. We need to take a brief commercial break, but we will be right back after that.
People welcomed me and they knew the pain of the journey that we'd been on because they'd been there too.
Other Parents Like Me is an online community, peer-led, for parents with kids struggling with mental health and or substances.
It's a space that's safe. Feels like I can actually share what's going on.
We offer 15 daily support groups per week and live speaker talks on Thursdays, as well as a monthly expert panel.
We also have a resource hub that has a toolkit. This includes over 1,000 articles, podcasts. There's a glossary with the most recent and relevant terms. And we have a directory that's been vetted.
The overwhelming feeling when we're sitting in a meeting and I'm telling my story and I see others shaking their head, tears falling, they understand this roller coaster and they're along for the ride.
In a world full of chaos, she chose to anchor her story in hope. Through storms and silence, she found strength. And now she's inviting you to do the same. This isn't just a book, it's a lifeline. For every woman who's ever felt unseen, your healing begins here, anchored in hope. Available now.
And we are back with Lisa, and she wrote the book Parallel Recovery. And like I said, it caught me right in the middle of, like 3/4 through the book. It's like, never would have thought that the people that have loved ones that go through substance abuse, that they have to go through recovery as well, because they're having to learn how to interact with their loved one differently. They're learning how to not take everything upon themselves and feel guilty about what their loved one may be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, I address it in the book that this isn't a get your loved one sober book. It is a how can you be in this relationship sustainably and connected.
For sure. And now you're going to read part of your book.
Yeah, I am. Okay, so a little lead up. There is, before this, I think it's slightly important, a bit of a story regarding our family's impact from a wildfire that ultimately burned our home and everything that we had. But there was a little bit of a lead up to this story, and the chapter is entitled Hard Easy or Easy Hard. You can't always predict or be prepared for what's coming down the line that will completely throw your life in a new direction. We all have a picture in our heads of what we think our future should be. I certainly did. When you realize one day that a person you love is consumed by substance use disorder, it can feel like that future has gone up in flames. You may feel like you woke up one day and poof, there it went, but it's not actually a quick burn. Sometimes we try to hold on way too long to the way things were and the way things were supposed to be. If I can smother this flame, tamp it out, then things will be easy again. When I work with families, there's a phrase I use early and often. It becomes a mantra of sorts, and it's a guiding question to help you take a good pause and consider the immediate choices in front of you. Is this hard easy, or is this easy hard? When faced with a choice, the options are 1, to begin with the hard thing and then move on to the easier stuff, hard easy, or 2, to begin with the easy thing and put off the hard, easy hard. Notice that hard appears in both of those equations. Remembering this phrase shines a light on the reality of the available choices. None of this is going to be easy. When substance use is involved, there is no easy option. You can either do the hard thing, have the hard conversation, set the difficult boundary, feel the complicated grief that is coming, and start the work of changing your role in the equation, or you can put it off and choose something easier right now. You hope that things will work their way out, avoid the boundary for fear that they will be upset with you, and separate them from the reality of their situation because the consequences are just too painful for you to witness. Kick the hard can down the road. On paper, this seems easier, but in practice, it's faking easy. The problem and its roots are still there, like a weed, waiting for the chance to emerge again. When you choose easy hard, you end up holding your breath, hoping that the hard doesn't come, or that if you are quiet enough, it will miss you on its way by. Holding your breath doesn't make the hard things miss you. It just puts off the steps you need to take to face the problem and work through it. While you are holding your breath, your life is also passing you by. When you understand and lean into the hard, no matter what, you will be able to exhale on the other side. The hard will be done, and you can receive the ease earned from your work. Exhale, lean in, and learn to face the hard things now. Yes, you can. If we are going to be honest, neither choice is truly easy. Hard is never fun, but I know that when you learn to lean into the hard things, you will be able to exhale. There will be a sense of less hard on the other side of this difficult equation. You will feel relief that the thing you've been carrying around is now out there. You will feel empowered to understand that what you're expecting from yourself is to have your needs met too. It can be a scary unknown, the far side of the hard call, but there can also be a level of relief that you will never reach if you continue to hold your breath and kick the hard can down the road. You have to exhale eventually.
And I love that. I love the fact that you were talking about the way we want of the way things used to be, because we have to really think about that. You know, things don't always happen in life like the way we want them, or the way, you know, burying our head in the sand is not going to get you through getting your loved one or getting your mental health good, well, and helping your loved one as well. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Yes. The complex, ambiguous grief of what should have been, what didn't happen, what could happen. Sometimes I have a whole chapter in the book on grief. And when I work with families, I sort of require the grief process to be discussed. A lot of times families believe that, first of all, what they're experiencing isn't grief. And it is. It's called ambiguous grief. It's a confusing grief that doesn't have like a moment that, like a death, that is clear in the grief process, but the grief process is still the same. It's just more confusing and it feels like you don't deserve to feel it. A lot of times we toxic positivity ourselves. Well, at least ourselves, right?
Yeah.
At least they're still here. Well, this is really hard. So at leasting doesn't make this feel any better, but acknowledging that it's hard could help. The other part of that is people feel like if I'm grieving, that means I can't hope. And one of the biggest parts of parallel recovery is holding space for two things, that you can be hopeful and you can also be in radical acceptance of what is right now, that you can experience joy in your life, even if your loved one is really struggling. Both of those things can exist. And that's really the only survivable way to get through this process.
Now, how did you manage? Because you said this came out because of your own struggle with your oldest son. How did you manage during that time? You already said that you had that little moment where he left and you were like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to if something happened, those were my last words I said to him. So how do you manage to take care of yourself to the point that you're like, okay, it's their life. They're doing what they're supposed to, what they want to do. And I can't interject, but I can voice my concern, but in such a way that it's a loving way, not in an obligatory way.
Yeah, for sure. There's ways to voice your concern. Step one is always ask the question, if I can, right? Could I share my thoughts on this so that they can actually receive it? Otherwise, you're wearing yourself down and pushing them further away. But in terms of taking care of myself, I think, for me, it became less about, I'm kind of an intense person, just a little bit. And I do intense things, like activities. And so less about the intensity and more about the intentionality. So what am I trying to receive from what I'm doing? What do I need? What do I really need right now? What do I need to fuel or rest myself? Is it intensity or is it intentionality? And sometimes it is intensity, but if it's the intensity at times was coming in the form of kind of self-punishment, I think. And so I had to really do a check, and I, still do a check on myself of like, am I proving something to myself or others, or am I really needing this level of depth in the intensity that I'm involving myself in? So, it's slowing down kind of the view of the external and focusing more on what's going on inside of me. What am I experiencing? What do I need? How do I name it and serve it?
When you name it and serve it, I love that. All I can think of is a waitress. You're taking your order and they bring out what you asked for. But sometimes it's not what you ask for. Sometimes life gives you stuff that you don't want to have to deal with.
Yeah.
And you can't bury your head in the sand. How do we go about telling, like you said, you share your thoughts in such a way that you're asking questions and not accusing? But how do you go about, because there's a lot of shame with family members if you have a family member that has a substance abuse. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, I think really, first of all, is get some professional help or support systems, support groups of people who understand your experience, because the you need tos and have you tried from well-meaning people, it's not helpful. And so finding common humanity with other people who are going through this experience in a healthful way, I think is really important. And there's lots of organizations, support groups. I have a support group where you can find space to be with people and talk about your experience, but be guided to have a healthier relationship with it. So that is really important. And kind of along those lines, I sort of have a system that I guide families with, of compartmentalizing your social group to include your family, because not all family is capable of holding space for the hard thing you're experiencing. And it's really important to understand who can and who can't. So I sort of bucket people, and I say there's, one bucket where, if you see them in the grocery store, you turn around because they're not safe, right? Your story is not, no amount of your story is safe. If they ask a question or if they see you, they're going to talk about you, right? Like, and you know who those people are. And some of those people might be in your extended family. You need to know that, right? Like, I'm just going to keep things short with them. Or you might, give yourself permission that this Thanksgiving, we're going to have a smaller event, because it's just too hard, and not even just hard, but it's too damaging to be with those people who can't hold space for what is raw for me right now. That's one bucket. Second bucket is people who might be able to have kind of the umbrella understanding of what's going on. My son is struggling with substance use, but they don't know intimate details, and they can hold space for that and not be nosy. As soon as that person says, well, what do they do? Or what do they use? Or they go in the first bucket, immediately demoted. So that second bucket is people who could be safe in book club and you just in circles where you go, where you don't have to pretend like things aren't difficult, but you don't want to talk about it. Right. Like, so someone might just say, hey, in book club, how are things going with your son? And that you can say, things are really hard, but thank you for asking. And that's it. You feel supported a little bit. They are not in it for their own gain, and they're sort of neutrally safe. And then there's your third bucket, which is, your small group, the people that you can say the hard things with and show up with your ugly crying, and they aren't going to fix it. They aren't going to, they aren't going to give you a list of therapists you need to call that I'm sure you have already called. And they're going to just love you and your person from afar, maybe, and not ask for anything to change. And that bucket is probably going to be small.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. The older you get, you learn who you can and cannot trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in high school, you want to be like high school, college, popularity, everything. But then you realize that it's not all about that. It's about having that core group that you can go and be raw and real with, and not fear of judgment. Because I know there's that judgment fear already when you have a loved one that is dealing with substance abuse, but having to share it with other people, and you're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to think about it? And like you said, when people start asking questions, oh, what do they use? How often? When did they start? They're more about the details, so they can spread the details around. Lisa's son, and it's not right. It's not about gossip. It's about healing. It's about a safe place for you as the person.
The other part of that is, those are people who that hasn't touched them close to home yet, or at least not that they've recognized. They need to feel good about the fact that they aren't in the situation. And that's not actually helpful, because if or when they are in the situation, that's going to be even harder for them when you've given them space to kind of be like, well, I must have done a better job of parenting.
That's the thing with the judgment with the parents. So let's talk about that. Because, obviously you went through with your son, and I just can't even imagine the judgment from other parents that came. I don't know how old your son was when all this stuff started, but I can just imagine how you felt as a mom. First of all, you gave birth to this child, or you have this child, you watched it raise. I don't know how many other kids, but you obviously have other kids because you said it was your oldest son, and wondering what you did differently with the other ones that you didn't do with them. And all this guilt is coming on, and the shame for moms, and the shame for parents, and shame for siblings of the person going through the substance abuse.
So I think
get over that shame.
Learning how to talk about it as a human experience. Because that's what it is. When someone's in pain, we love them. We don't reject them. Diseases of the body or diseases of the brain are diseases of the body. The brain is attached to the body. So just because it's not visible, like a broken arm or a cast on a leg, doesn't mean there isn't a broken part in them. And when we can start talking about brain disorders as disorders and not personal choice problems, then we can start healing people. Because that's who's hurting at the end of the day. So, I want to go back to it. Is it lonely? Is it hard? Is it isolating? Yeah. If you're in this, yes. The answer is yes. It is, even to me. And I do this. I'm on a podcast. I wrote it in a book. I have a TED Talk. I speak all over the place. I work with families all over the country. And it is still isolating and hard. And, having those conversations with yourself and your very small bucket of people, that this is a human experience that is impacting somebody who I love more than anything. and I need support so that I can support them.
Yeah, just making
Because
that
there are days where you think, stop it, just stop doing that. But if it were as easy as stop doing that, people would stop doing that. Yeah.
And the rehab facilities would go out of business if it was as easy as stop doing that.
Right. Correct.
So I want to talk about,
it's not that easy.
I want to talk about the one point in your book when you talk about your son calls you, I think he calls you and tells you that he's moving to Utah.
Yeah.
And it's just like a shock to your system, you and your husband. So let's talk about that, because that's when he took it upon himself.
Yeah, he did. That was really probably we had been doing kind of our parallel recovery. I didn't have a name for it then, but we had been doing it. I had been coaching my husband and myself, and we had been doing that for, probably going on a year, honestly. And so we were all in very different places than we had been in previous instances of like, what kind of decision are you making right now? And so we were able to get curious with him because we had been practicing this. We had been practicing it in small, low risk situations, like I'm going to take this job over that job, or I'm going to live here instead of there. Like those are low risk situations, but I'm moving. And by the way, I'm on an airplane is a big risk situation. And definitely we had concerns and we had panic. And instead of giving our opinion, which we had one, we asked him what led to this, what was his thought process, and how could we understand and support him. He told us, and he said, look, I this is what I need. This is what I want. I've already called these professionals to support me. Could you call them and, kind of suss them out as a mom and dad? And then these are the things I could use financial help with. And it was a therapist, and it was a sober living, and it was, things that were valuable to him. He was just ready to move forward with his life in a way that, would we have picked for him to stay where he was instead of that? Yeah, we would have. But it wasn't our life to do that with, and he wasn't blowing his life up. And what's interesting about that story is he had actually still been in like an outpatient treatment at the time. And his therapist called us and said, well, I guess we're back to square one. And it was the first time I had the opportunity as a non-professional to counter what that professional was saying in a very educated and real way. And I said, look, this might not work out for him. I don't know. Would we choose an alternative? Yes. And we have the kind of relationship that we have worked really hard for that says, how can we support you? We're not co-signing everything. And what's our role in this for this to be successful, and to give him agency to make it successful for himself. And I'll tell you, that professional was speechless when, I kind of let them know that I think you're wrong. And they were wrong.
I love that. And I love the fact that you were allowing your son to make the choices in his life, giving him, like you said, agency to make the choices for things that he needs to get done. But you're also showing him that, hey, we're still here. If you need us, we're supporting you. But of course, as a parent, we'd rather have our kids underneath us and around us all the time. I mean, I'm speaking from a mom who lives in North Carolina and her oldest daughter lives in California. So we're on both two coasts. And so, of course, you want that, but you're allowing them the chance to make their own decision and to kind of feel like their recovery is important to you, but it's in their hands. It's not you doing the steps for them. They have to do the steps themselves, and they have to want it for themselves.
Exactly. And the process to get there isn't overnight. The process is untangling all of the intricate ways that we are weaved in and out of our children's lives. So for example, we had spent a year with him understanding that we didn't just give him money, that there were certain things that we supported: recovery, mental health, his own wellness. And there were certain things that weren't our job to support, like his rent or food, right? Like, I mean, he worked, he could make food for himself and buy it. And so we weren't so entangled anymore. And so when he asked us for support, he wasn't asking us to overstep our line or our boundaries or our roles. He was asking us to partner because we had been partnering. And I'm going to go back to what I said before in this topic, which is in low risk ways. We had been practicing, and it's really important. It's not just in the big stuff. You can't you can't run a marathon if you haven't run a 5K. You need to run a 5K first. So I have a section in my book that I the phrase is what's your hamburger? And it's about boundaries. And it's really about, if you've not made boundaries before, actual boundaries, most people make rules and think they're boundaries, but real boundaries, it's going to be really hard to set a boundary in a big stake thing. But you need to come up with your hamburger situation. What's the small thing that you can create a boundary around? That particular story is a client that I worked with who I'm pretty sure had never said no to their adult son, who was living in their home in active addiction. And he was abusive. And so I said, well, what can we start with? Because she was not setting boundaries. And I'm like, let's start with something. How about dinner? And she's like, well, I make dinner. And I was like, of course. And so I was like, so how about this? Everyone needs to know that they need to tell you by 3:00 if they're going to be home for dinner. And if they don't tell you, they don't have dinner made. And she was clutch my pearls. Right. And she was like, and I said, he has a house full of food. He'll figure it out. There's cereal somewhere, I'm sure. And I'm like, why don't you try it? So the next day she tried it and she was like, hey, I just want to let everybody know, family chat. I need to know by 3 if you're going to be home for dinner. Otherwise I'm going to assume you're not. And I won't make you any. Of course she had all the but it's just as easy to make more. And I'm like, it's actually harder to make less. But that's not the point. And her son came home. He hadn't told her and he got pretty upset, threw a chair, got really upset. And she simply said, shoot, maybe tomorrow you can let me know by 3 and I'd be happy to make you dinner. And the next day he let her know he was going to be home. So that's the retraining process, right? Letting them know that this is what I need for this relationship to work, because I really want the relationship to work, as opposed to your behavior is terrible. And so I'm going to exit the relationship until you change that behavior.
Yep. And I love that too, but it's because as moms, we're trained to provide for the, have meals on the table. Everybody's there. I've had some friends who are moms that they make a different meal for each and every individual in their family. I'm like, no, you set boundaries, you cook it. If they don't want to eat it, then go get a peanut butter sandwich out of the.
Yeah, there's a pantry full of food. This is what we're having for dinner. Yeah,
it's in a way you're retraining your brain as well. Not only training the person that your loved one, but you're also retraining how you show up in situations.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second, because women and moms and different cultures and different parts of the country even have very specific unspoken expectations of mothers, right? So let's talk about the dinner thing. How many people do you know that would say, well, I just love them so much that I do it this way. And so they feel like their expression of love is by shipping away parts of themselves. That's how they love. And I actually challenge that. And I say, what are you teaching them actually? What are you teaching them? Instead of training them, hey, look, I'm important, you're important, we're important. How can all of those things be met? Yeah.
That is so true, because like you said, we're so trained and then we feel bad. The first couple of times we do it, we're going to feel bad because, my child's not going to eat, or they're going to but they're going to figure it out, because that's what part of being an adult, growing up to be an adult. Now, you did say something earlier, and I want to come back to this about the low risk questions. Do you suggest going ahead, even if your child or your loved one doesn't have a substance abuse problem right now, go ahead and start integrating that into how you communicate with each other, so when big problems like substance abuse arise, that's already the groundwork for it?
Yes, 100%. So let's talk about substance use disorder. It's a diagnostic or a diagnosis of mental illness. And in 2018, the diagnosis before 2018 was either yes or no. You have substance use disorder or you don't. And now there's a spectrum: mild, medium, or don't get help, and we don't start talking about it until it's severe. Why would we not talk about cancer until it's stage 4? We don't. We do runs for breast cancer awareness. There's prostate awareness. We do colonoscopies at certain ages to prevent things. We get things on the early end. As wonderful as every single family is, and they believe that their children are not going to engage in risky behavior, it is the developmental norm to engage in risky behavior. So start talking about it, and talk about it in curious ways. Have you ever noticed this? Have you ever heard about? Have you ever been exposed to? Have you ever seen? Not, in data collection manners. Curiosity is not super sleuthing. Curiosity is honest curiosity. I'm wondering if you've ever seen these things. And then the other part of that equation is talking about your own experiences, your own family history. 1 in 12 people, everybody's family has somebody impacted. So being able to say, we have some risks in our family, and these are things that you should know about yourself. There is a wonderful book that I'll give a plug to. It's called Unaddiction. And the woman who wrote it is a psychiatrist. Her name is Nzinga Harrison, Nzinga. And she has a sort of a suggestion. She even has a scripts for discussing vulnerabilities, genetic vulnerabilities, or predispositions to mental health and substance use. And it's important to talk about that because these are not there's not genetic markers for these things. Like there's not like on the X chromosome, it's this, but it's called epigenetics, and there are genetic vulnerabilities that allow for traumas or age of exposure or developmental delays to become part of the process of developing these brain disorders. So it's really important to talk about it, not from a don't ever do it standpoint, but from an educational standpoint. And I'm here to be the bearer of bad news. It needs to happen before you think it does.
For sure, because kids are aging a lot quicker, even though their ages are 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, they're still learning about the world. I think a lot of it has to do with social media as well.
Yeah, they have access to everything on the internet, whether you think they do or not, they do. And if they don't, their friend does, or their friend's sister. So like they're getting it. So let's talk about it. Let's make sure that we're a part of that equation. And then, so let me give you an example of a conversation. Actually, I had this conversation with somebody whose daughter was in college, and my son he's about to graduate from college, but if anyone is listening that has been a part of a university setting, I call it the crazy parent page of and insert college on like the Facebook page where parents kind of talk about things. Well, one person had posted on there and said, my daughter called us this weekend and she has been going to parties. It was her freshman year, have been going to parties and partaking of alcohol. And she's really concerned because she notices herself being impacted way more than her friends. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. There it is. Like that is, if you start the conversations young, your child, when they get to that place where they go, my friends seem to be able to turn it off and I don't. Or my friends have drinks at football games. I have drinks every day. Like you start noticing how you're being impacted differently. And that's the difference between unhealthy relationship with alcohol and substance use disorder, which is a not choice disorder.
Yeah. That is so good. I mean, you've given me a lot. I wish we had more time because, this is like something that we can definitely delve into more and more and more because, so many people, like you said, are impacted by substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, and it seems like it's becoming more of a normal in society now because people are trying to drown out whatever else is going on in their life. But also, too, I think talking about it more has become more acceptable than the shame and the guilt that people have had to deal with. So our time is almost up. Is there one last little thing before we talk about where people can find you that you either want to reiterate or something we haven't touched on? The floor is yours.
I think I just want people to know there's a phrase out there that goes, you didn't cause it and you can't control it. And those are true statements. And I would say that the third part of that is left out is you do have the ability to influence your loved one if you can get around the behavior and connect to the person. So, the idea of detaching from a person who is hurting doesn't feel very loving. How can you step back so that you can take care of yourself and then step into the relationship and being connected? Because by the time somebody gets to treatment, things are pretty bad and you've been there along the way. What if you could be the start to this professional help?
Well, I love that. That's such a good nugget to end on. So where can people find you?
Sure. My website is lisakatonasmith.com. I am most active on Instagram, parallel_recovery. And you can get my book on Amazon.
And if you had looked earlier, if you saw when she was reading, I put the QR code up and I'll put it back up again. If you're watching on YouTube, you can just scan that QR code and go right over to Amazon and get it, because I think it's very important that sometimes in this day and age of our mobile phones or whatever, being able to click, go, more people are more likely to purchase that way than they are to have to Google the book.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I invite you to come back on, because I just think we just hit the very teeny tiny tip of the iceberg on this. There's so much more that we can go into. So
for sure,
you're welcome to come back on anytime.
Would love to.
All right. So guys, I will share in the show notes all where you can find Lisa, as well as the book Unaddiction. I wrote it down so I can remember to put it up in the show notes, because she plugged it, and I feel like if she plugged it, she knows what she's talking about. And until next time, guys, bye.